Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And we're honored to have with us Tom Karako, who is the man who oversees missile defense here. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be with you.
Tom, obviously a very big week. North Korea's in the headlines for its missile capabilities. You look very, very closely at what they're doing. What are some of the things that you learned from seeing what was on parade in Pyongyang at the big celebration of Kim Il-sung's 105th birthday?
Right. Well, it's always something with North Korea. This week it was the parade and an attempt at a missile test. The parade included a couple new things. It included some new canisters, some ICBM-sized canisters. We're not sure if anything was in them or what it might be for, but they seemed pretty big. And so that was one new component. There were a couple other sort of variations of Scuds, variations of Musadons that we hadn't quite seen before in the same shape. And there were a couple other things that seemed to be new, a kind of a missile that the Pentagon's calling KN-17 that may or may not be kind of an anti-ship missile of sorts, DF-21 style. And in addition to all that, they had a lot of their kind of legacy systems. Their air defenses, which kind of remind us that it would be messy to go in there. As well as some of their artillery, which of course holds Seoul and other things at risk.
Do you think North Koreans have been focused on developing this missile capability in earnest for many years now? There have been a string of failures that recently have plagued the North Korean missile program, although you have to say that the missiles that they've been working on are more ambitious than some of the things that they've been working on in the past. But there's this sense that the United States is either jamming or hacking or has somehow gotten into these networks that damage them. What do we know about that aside from some of these reports?
Yeah, so actually I think that some of that might be a little bit overblown. They test a lot of missiles. Some of them blow up in the air, some of them don't. Many of them seem to be reaching their targets. It is the case, as everybody has always, I think, understood, that North Korea accepts a higher degree of risk in its manufacture of these things before it fields them. So some of this is really not surprising at all. Now, in respect to kind of how we understand or think about those sometime failures, and it's not necessarily all the time, but how we think about those sometimes failures, there is a narrative out there right now, based in part on some reporting, that maybe the United States or other folks are waving a kind of magic wand, cyber wand of sorts, and making these things spontaneously combust. And I guess I would caution about that in a couple respects. I have no doubt that we have every intent, and we're doing our very darndest to try to complicate the manufacture and everything else related to these things. The challenge, of course, is that I think by just about everybody's recognition, our insight, our penetration into what's going on in North Korea is fairly limited. And if that's the case, our capacity to disrupt so many of these things in different left of launch ways might be more limited than one might hope. So I think there's probably a little bit of hubris and a little bit of wishful thinking in that. And I think we have to be kind of careful and manage our expectations about just how much we're able to disrupt with these sort of cyber non-kinetic capabilities in different ways.
Is there, how long before the North Koreans are, based on their current pace, going to have weapons that can threaten not just Guam, where there's a weapon that already does have the range to be able to reach out and touch Guam, but where we believe that there will be the confluence of the miniaturized warhead with a weapon that can actually reach the continental United States?
Right, well that's a $64,000 question. Of course, it's the combination of the miniaturization, it's the reentry tests, some of which they've been doing on the ground, right? Some of which they may have built into some missile flight tests already. And of course, it's the missile itself, having both the range but also the throw weight coupled with the range to get there. I think anybody who tries to put a particular date on that is by necessity speculating. Some folks are saying that that's 2020, right? Maybe it is. I think that, again, the degree of insight that we have here is relatively limited. And so while it may not be this week, they've surprised us before. And so I think we have to, and I think what you've been seeing from the combatant commanders is they're being appropriately conservative. And this is why, in fact, we have certain defenses and certain operational plans, so that if this pops up tomorrow, we will have some readiness for it.
I was talking to a British friend of mine who's a pretty solid defense analyst, and his sense was that if the North Koreans go to a submarine-launched ballistic missile capability, the defensive challenge for the United States goes up by an order of magnitude, and especially he questioned the fundamental even reliability of a ground-based missile defense interceptor system that we have. You know, his thinking was, we've really got a better, it's a much smarter thing for us to try to go, for example, to multiple THAAD batteries, the Theater High Altitude Area Defense system, and array them on the West Coast to be able to give you sort of this broader footprint of coverage, because the ground-based interceptor site is predicated that you know what the launch trajectory is going to be.
Yeah, the reasons for that are not too complicated and don't require a great deal of analysis to figure out that you can't fire something from Alaska to come down at light speed and hit something off the coast. And so in a way, that kind of short range, almost more of an air defense kind of problem is also a distributed problem. And you know, for right now, in terms of our long-range interceptors, we have a fairly centralized hub, Fort Greely, Alaska, as well as Vandenberg, for that kind of threat. I think that you're going to probably see increased pressure for a greater distribution, called distributed defense, for not merely the SLBMs, which they may or may not be able to get across the Pacific, and our anti-submarine warfare would probably be the first effort to get at that problem. But frankly, you know, whether it's the defense of Hawaii, the defense of the East Coast from cruise missiles as well, which is a different problem altogether. So I think the larger impetus for a more distributed missile defense, air defense architecture is very strong. Whether THAAD batteries lining the coast, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right answer, but presumably there would need to be a variety of things.
Do you think that as we, hang on a second, let me pause for a second. The concern now is what sort of strategy. The administration now is working on what its strategy is going to be beyond some immediate saber rattling, the redirection of the Vincent battle group to go north to the Korean Peninsula from where it was transiting for, it was actually headed in the opposite direction to go and, let me re-ask the question. The Trump administration is working on what its new strategy is going to be in a prolonged basis beyond the sort of immediate saber rattling we've seen, the deployment and some of the controversy that went with the carrier battle group. Is there any value to the suggestion that some have made that now that the North Koreans are on this path and are being much more aggressive in launching these missiles and testing them, that the United States should now start to try to shoot down those weapons the minute that they cross into international sea space?
Yeah, so that is a big, hairy question in terms of what exactly we're trying to do there and kind of the cost and benefits of doing so. And I can kind of just, I think, weigh some of the on the one hand, on the other hand kind of thing. A potential benefit of something like that would be to communicate seriousness of resolve to the North Koreans, that no kidding, we have the appetite for kinetic activity. I mean, in some ways, the actions in Syria and other places have that secondary or tertiary communication, but this would be much more connected to the North Korean problem, obviously. The difficulty, of course, is making sure that we know why we're doing it. For a political reasons, for a messaging reason, that could make sense, that decision could be made. But from a threat question, you begin to raise the question of, if it doesn't threaten the United States, if it doesn't threaten our allies, how many of our scarce interceptors do you want to use? We hope it would intercept. I think in a way, what you might be interesting is if we were to do it without announcing it first, rather than kind of beat our chest beforehand, announce maybe after the fact. That might be a little bit more interesting. But I think we have to be careful about this. We have to, I think, be pretty precise on why we would be doing it and the extent to which we would want to do it. Because you begin to get in a situation where we want to shoot down every Scud. That's going to eat into our effective capacity of Patriots or Aegis or what have you.
Tom, thanks very much for joining us.
As always, enjoyed it. Thank you.